And this has been what we're going in. Like 6, 7. Cool. Okay, should be fine. It's fine. Yeah. Yep.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
One party, one parliament, one view on decisions. This is not a democracy where the views of all people are represented. This is an elected dictatorship. On affirmative, we are the side of true democracy. Specifically, our model for today is that we support norms and institutions that proportionally represent the outcomes of a democratic election, which means you do get concessions, you do get compromises. This is in contrast to systems such as first past the post, where a plurality, where a majority, regardless of the ratio of opposition, gets total power after an election. What we're not doing is introducing a veto for a minority. We are instead encouraging the majority to engage with and to consider the views of an opposition. And we've got 3 points under our side of the house today. To achieve two clear paths to victory. And our first path to victory is that we show that democracy is improved. Our second path being that we improve policy for either more people or higher quality policy in general. And 3 points from our side of the house today is that firstly, we show that principally the norms norms that best represent the people with democracy. Secondly, that we get better administration under our side of the house. Hunter's going to split on how parties campaign better. Okay, so firstly, why principally does our support in these norms and institutions of shared political power best represent the people, of society, best represent democracy? 3 reasons for this. Firstly, we tell you that democratic principles seek to represent the most amount of voices from the people. This is broken when we give power to one majority power who dictates all decision, to one majority party who dictates all decision making because all other opinions get flushed out in this process. Secondly, we tell you that under democracies, clearly divergent views exist and are often highly represented through opposition. And the reason for this is because people have a range of experiences, people have a range of views. This is how individuals in society function. And so crucially, alignment to parties are also often split, down lines of income, down lines of race, or down lines of class. Since similar groups in society have the closest shared experiences, they're going to gain similar benefits from certain policy changes. What that means is that when they are not represented after losing down a split of 51-49 or 60-40, then for 3 years, for 4 years, no change happens for these people, even when they are this huge percentage of a population. We see that as inherently harmful. Thirdly, we also tell you that it's really crucial that new democracies, such as Tanzania, such as Algeria, get these opposition voices in their parliaments, because again, they're also often the most segregated down racial lines in terms of who comes to power. And that means that one ethnic group may lead to the majority, maybe what the majority party represents. When we have these norms and institutions that support when we have these norms and institutions that support a variety, we get better structural change for the people as a whole. This is what our model shows. Okay, so secondly then, how do we get better administration under our side of the house? And there are 2 key points for this. Firstly, we tell you that governments with no opposition are going to be self-serving. 3 reasons for this. Firstly, that under negating essentially they're just voting for termed dictatorships because governments are going to implement policies that serve themselves, that keep themselves in power. This means that they're likely going to change laws to make it easier to stay in power. They're going to change laws that decrease freedom of speech. They're essentially just going to overreach in their policy decisions. This is what happens in Hungary. This is what happens in Sri Lanka. Secondly, they're also going to implement policies that largely serve their own voter bases and without consideration of the rest of a demographic, of the rest of a population. Because again, they want to stay in power, so they're obviously going to play into the people that have put them there in the first place. This looks like how the BJP in India, like during the pandemic, exclusively handed out food to areas where they held majority. And so essentially when you treat like your opposition voter base as second-class citizens, what we get is wasted spending, and we get this huge like undermining of democracy and very clear social, very clear economic harms. And then again, because voter bases, like I've outlined, are often split down ethnic lines, are split down religious lines, what we get is a perpetuation of patronage. What we get is a perpetuation of marginalisation. This does not happen under our side of the House. I'll take a point if you have one.
Why is like there not like a massive amount of money wasted on like this needless bureaucracy when you have like a whole bunch of like admin positions given to like the opposition?
So first of all, like this is going to be a lot, this is coming up very shortly, but we believe that we get hugely more, like none of this is bureaucratic, this is hugely effective and is going to have like better long-term outcomes because we essentially are creating like the best, we're having the best individuals in power that create the best policies for people. More on this later. And so again, like thirdly, we also stop backsliding from these governments because in the same vein as them like being self-serving, which looks like, you know, and looks like gerrymandering, Hungary, which is like backslid, for example, to how like the media presents candidates. Like in our world, what we have instead are checks and balances that present things such as having parties draw congressional boundaries together. Therefore, we restrict like harmful practices such as backsliding. Okay, so secondly, like this is more like an address to that POI, is that NEG may push that this does reduce efficiency, that this whole process is highly bureaucratic and is not a very efficient use of resources. And we've got a few responses to this. Firstly, that we believe we actually get more capable administration making better policy decisions because when you open like all these roles to any members of parliament, to any members of a government, then that means we have a greater diversity of ability and skill to choose from for ministerial roles. This looks like how Obama kept the same defense secretary as like from the Bush administration, because rather than like having a new person change, having a new person in that position every time the party changes, we have the same person who likely has the same level of expertise, who has prior experience and is going to make more capable decisions. Secondly, on this, we tell you that even if like this process does get slightly more bureaucratic, slightly more time consuming, we say that we're willing to make such a sacrifice when we have instead healthy debate, when we have policies that are made that are not wholly self-serving, but rather more representative of public opinion, that have like that create more equitable views on policies. And these policies are likely to succeed in the long run because they are works of compromise. Thirdly, we tell you that in the worst instance, the worst instance in which every action is obstructed does not happen because of two reasons. Firstly, that when you have this unified administration, you are presenting that as your front, and you as a member of that government, like governmental body, are accountable for policy output. So therefore your interest is working together with opposition to essentially create the best policies with compromises rather than vetoing everything. Secondly, we tell you that like even as an individual minister that's been appointed by an opposition government, you're likelier to do a better job because again, like that better job where you have like policy outcomes happen, mean that you are viewed more favourably in light of the public. You're likely to keep that role and subsequently give power to your party. Stand on the side of real democracy, stand on side affirming. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the first negating speaker to open their team's case.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. When voters see so little progress in government, they begin to lose faith in the very concept of government itself and stop voting. We have a problem. Today, I will give a little bit of setup about what this looks like. I will talk about preventing meaningful change, and I will talk about ruining the democratic process. My rebuttal will be integrated into my speech. We win this today's debate by, we have two paths to victory. First of all, on the fact that the affirming sides prevents meaningful change, and secondly, that they ruin the democratic process. But first of all, let's have a little bit of setup. So we see realistically that this debate actually takes place in countries with highly developed and secure political systems where the opposition is already afforded lots of significant political power and within democratic systems. This means that there are safeguards against anti-democratic practices and fair elections. And we know that lots of these countries also have multiple layers of parliament. For example, the US has the Senate and the House, and same with Australia and the UK. We see this is not places, for example, like Hungary or Sri Lanka, which the opposing team brought up, but also not like the BJP, which is not a democracy anyway. We see that this debate realistically takes place in democratic democratic countries. So we ask, what does the opposition look like, especially under the comparative? Well, we tell you the opposition is contrarian, usually is against policies just for the sake of being against policies, and tries to stall policies at all costs under the affirming side house. No, on our side, we still have an opposition, which still has access to the public, still does media interviews, but mostly as opposition, not political. Oh, sorry. But on our side, the opposition would have no chairpersons in any select committees. The government would not approach the opposition and not work with them on bills, not supporting them in speaker or assistant speaker positions. And this is a comparative differentiation. So we heard from the affirming team that this was would result in a self-serving government that would completely ruin democracy, to which we say democracy still exists, right? Democracy fundamentally still exists, and it's important that we still have that opposition. They just don't have that active vote or their active say in the bills that are being passed. So firstly, on preventing meaningful change. This is in response to the point we heard from affirming that we were told no change happens for 49% of the voters, wherein if you've got a tightly split election and 51% said one way and 49% said the other way, those 49% do not get heard at all. To which we say, actually, really no significant change is happening at all on affirming sides, where they're preventing meaningful change by having this constant contrarian system where nothing gets passed significantly. So first of all, let's step through what this looks like. We tell you no matter how strong a push from the elected party, they will always face obstinate opposition and deliberately kind of backwards arguments, deliberately contrarian, right, on the affirming side. Take your POI later, please. We tell you, one, the opposition can't actually enforce legislation. The only purpose of the opposition on F side anyway is to deliberately antagonize and go against every single thing on principle, which means very little, if anything, can get passed. We tell you, we see great harms for this. Firstly, in the idea of time urgency. We see great politically divisive things that need action from the government. For example, things like climate change. We tell you we have 12 years to improve the climate, right? That's 3 American terms. That's 3 American presidential terms. That's basically nothing. We tell you things for an example for New Zealand with COVID. Under COVID, we had a massively successful COVID response, right, in New Zealand. But then the reason that we were able to work so quickly and get that kind of 8-week lockdown immediately passed is because everything was passed under urgency and suspended opposition's power. And this was put in place so we could get that meaningful change that we needed to have to stop the spread of this damaging virus. We tell you here that when the opposition isn't able to veto any meaningful change and legislation gets passed, this is reducing government debt. This is things that need to happen. This looks for climate change, banning oil rigs, free public transport, nitrogen-based fertilizers being banned, banning fossil fuels, things that have tangible impacts. But then finally, we tell you like these things can be politically divisive. For example, like women's rights legislation. But we tell you that the party was voted in on these policies. The party that is voted in into government was like voted in to make these changes. And this is what the majority wants. That is like the fundamental, like the point of democracy. The party that has been voted in should be able to have the power to pass meaningful legislation. I will take a POI now.
If your party is in government as opposition, then why would you criticise yourself?
Sorry, you broke up there. Can you please repeat that?
If your party is in government as an opposition, why would you criticise yourself?
I don't know what you mean by why would you criticize yourself, but we tell you that actually when the opposition is in government, their purpose is there to like basically contrary and like veto every single thing the like party in power like puts forward, whether that is like actually progressive or not, whether that's going to create meaningful change or not. They're simply there to say no, 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 which we see is like incredibly backwards in the system, and we would rather like they did have less of this like veto power. But onto the idea of like ruining democratic processes. We tell you this is in like response to the like we were told the norms that best represent people is democracy. And we agree, but we actually think that F's case ruins the democratic process. Firstly, and that the policies they voted on aren't ever passed, which I just talked about, means that people are not engaging anymore, and there's like no point going to the effort to vote. If people see that they like voted in a government and then they don't do anything for 4 years because they can't pass anything, people think, well, then government doesn't really matter anymore. I'm not even going to vote. Like, this is really just not important to me because nothing's getting done anyway. No, I won't take it. But secondly, people don't see the people they want voted in. Someone they supported is sitting arm to arm with someone they hated. People feel as though they're literally not electing who they want, so democracy fails them. But thirdly, it takes significantly longer to get anything passed, as I fleshed out why this was so harmful, and like the example of climate change having such limited time pressure in order to create change. But also just having to like pass things and take time for these considerations under F's side. And fourthly, accountability. We tell you that when you have a government that has under F's side, you can't like blame or hold them to account because it's like more of like a group project thing, right? There is no one government that like has to, or like one party that takes the blame for the things where they fail and the things where they achieve. Finally, like on the concept of democracy itself, when you are voted in to do something, you should have the right, and let it be known, the obligation to do it, right? People voted this government in, not the opposition. So what this government can achieve should occur. We heard about like self-serving, backsliding governments. And we tell you, if they do backslide, if they are self-serving, they will be voted out in the next election. There is still a democratic process with which we like structure under. It's just that we're now not being stopped by the opposition at every single cause just for the sake of being an opposition. So finally, on this, we have like firmly won this debate because we tell you when we ruin the democratic process, the party in power like doesn't represent the people anymore. And there are great harms to this with people disengaging in democracy and the democratic system falling apart, which is why we are very proud to negate. Thank you.
Awesome.
So our Wi-Fi isn't fantastic. So if anything happens,
Yeah.
just please let us know.
I might should I send like Rob Hoskins or something? Do you reckon, Zach?
Yeah, why don't you swap to better? Like, why don't you swap to the uni instead? Like,
Okay.
coaches, can you help them? Oh, no, none of you go here. Or
Sorry. I just thought I'd flag exactly the same thing. My Wi-Fi has been pretty sketchy for this debate. I don't know if it's you guys or on my end, but that's just why I turned my camera off in the second half of that last speech. Hope that's okay.
Oh, okay. I think it's a little bit on your end because we can see the bars on you, Joe.
Right. Okay.
Blue, do you want to swap or?
Yeah, we might.
Yeah, I think
On their way.
yeah.
Yeah, just take a moment to swap, but later I think it's fine. You don't need me, right? I can log people in otherwise.
Cool. Can you guys still hear us?
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, I think it's just catching up. You're frozen.
Laptop.
Yeah, yeah, can you hear us now?
Yeah, but you're still through. Oh.
Oh, cool. I think that's gone back to normal. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We're on uni Wi-Fi now, I think.
Okay.
Cool.
That is still not that good, I have to say.
It is a little bit better than it was, I'd say.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I thank the speaker very much for their speech. I now invite up the second affirming speaker to continue their team's case.
I am audible. Okay, perfect.
Maybe. Okay, I think it seems to be okay because we're just going to say cameras. Let's see how it goes.
Okay, perfect. Sidenegg cannot win this debate when they try and cherry pick the examples of where this motion stands. They cannot say that this motion will only happen in Germany and France, but it will not happen in Hungary just because it doesn't support their case. They cannot ignore third world developing democracies when it does not support their case. They need to engage with all democracies, stand with the side of Birmingham, the side that wants stronger, real democracy and stronger, more representative policy. What am I going to do in my speech here today? 3 things. Firstly, I'm going to address how does decision-making look like under our world. Secondly, I'm then going to talk about how voters are likely to view the government. I'm thirdly then going to split on how parties campaign better and more positively on our side. Let's talk about how does decision-making look. The main push from side negating in this debate is the concept of obstruction. Mainly that if you're an opposition member and you're appointed to a particular position in cabinet, you're just going to keep vetoing decisions and you're going to keep wanting to do this. Here's why that isn't actually the incentive and why you're not likely to do that in our world. Firstly, we tell you that it's not actually an incentive of you as a person to keep being a thorn and not get anything passed, because when you go to the ballot box, you then have to try and justify yourself because you were in that government and you didn't do anything. All you did was you voted no on everything and your ministry or whatever position of power you had didn't actually accomplish anything. We tell you that there is no interest and no incentive for you when you are a part of government or part of the executive to constantly try and sabotage your government. Secondly, then they told us about how you don't get things done quickly. They try to use the example of climate change and saying we're not getting policy. We'll tell you what the comparative is on climate change, especially if you want to use their 12-year example, because we tell you that what we see in the current status quo in a country like the United States, for example, is you get a blue wave of the Democratic Party. They try and pass really sort of radical climate change policy. What does the Republican Party do? They capitalize on this, they move in, and then you get a massive amount of change as well. So you don't actually get any change because you're constantly yo-yoing in between massive amount of radical change and massive amount of fighting back. What we get on our side is we get that the Democratic Party goes in and they appoint a couple of Republican senators or members to their cabinet. Those Republican members help them write that policy and they help it get a bipartisan bill passed that both parties feel proud about. It means you're less likely to get that policy overturned in the next time rather than what side negating wants to tell you. They also brought things like COVID-19 or disasters. We tell you disasters, it's completely ridiculous to think that you want to be actively saying, no, we don't want to give people masks. We don't want to give people subsidies in COVID-19. We don't want to help people in disasters. That is the exact sort of thing that is going to harm you as in the long run when you go to election. We tell you you're still more likely to want to do things in times of disaster quite quickly. Then on the mechanism of backsliding, we brought you this material about how backsliding is no longer a problem on our side because it means that for things like gerrymandering, it's bipartisan creation of those those voting maps. We tell you that you can't do things like restricting freedom of speech or restricting what people can vote. The only mechanism that side negating brought to respond to this was that we will just vote them out anyway. Notice that when you have a system of backsliding and gerrymandering, when the Republican Party comes in and splits up your electorate, so you literally can't vote Democrat, you can't actually vote out those gerrymanders, it's already happened. On our world instead, you don't get that because those maps never happen anyway. You as a voter are more able to hold your government accountable because those things aren't there aren't systems that have been put in place that actively try and sabotage you. I'll also notice that side negating actually took a very hard line in what they want in terms of trying to stand for democracy, because they told us on first they don't want any sort of select committees. They don't want the opposition to have any voice or any power in the government as a whole. So notice that is even a greater deviation from what we have in the status quo. And it means that side negating needs to stand for a world which is less democratic, where if you vote for an opposition party, you feel less enfranchised because your opposition party literally now cannot do anything, because side negating wants a world where they have absolutely no power. Because we're the side that leads to more quality decision making, because of the material that Alyssa brought you about how we prevent things like countries that have significant ethnic lines from having complete control, we have governments for unity rather than governments of division, we lead to better policy getting made. Let's talk then about how voters engage with the government then. The main push was that people are going to feel less engaged in the government from side negating because they're like, nothing is getting, either nothing is getting passed, or B, like everything is happening slowly. I've already responded to you about why things are still likely to be passed, because there's not that incentive to be obstructive. But let's talk about how people are actually likely to be more engaged in politics on our side. Because we tell you that what you see in the status quo, we tell you that if you're a Democrat voter and you vote Democrat and the Democrats end up losing in a red wave 55% to 45%, you are no longer engaged in that because the Republicans have full control over all policy. For 4 years, you feel no level of engagement. However, how it works on our side, because your vote has a proportional value of what that government looks like and how that's built up, we tell you that you actually feel more engaged because you feel that my vote contributed to having a democratic voice on the table, rather than we just have complete Republican control like we get on side negating side. We tell you that because decision making, I've already proven to you why decision making looks better. And secondly, why Alyssa's done all that groundwork about why democracy is more representative. We're winning on how voters view government. I'm now going to move on to my split material about how parties campaign better, but I'll take a POI if you have one.
If you feel as though you've been blocked out of politics for 4 years, you're not going to have so much more anger and will to want to vote to change that, as opposed to under your side of the house, where you literally feel like you're going to keep meeting.
Okay, the problem with that though is that what you get on their side now is that parties aren't actually campaigning on policy, they're campaigning on anger. It means the Republican Party under Mitch McConnell doesn't actually need to do policy. He just needs to say, you guys hate Biden, we hate Biden, let's get Biden out. And I'm not actually going to tell you what I want to run on. I just know you hate Biden and we're going to capitalize on your anger. It's worse on your side. Let's talk about how parties campaign better though. 3 things I'm going to talk about. Firstly, we tell you that in general, like campaigning is more positive because you as a party are going to campaign on what you did well, rather than try and bully the government and tell them what they did badly. Why is this a good thing? Because it tells you that like you're looking at things retrospectively rather than trying to make fake campaign promises about like what you're going to do if you get elected, rather than the voters are judging you on what you actually did. It means that there's an incentive now for you to do well as that police minister, to do well as that defense minister, because now you can go to the voters and tell you that we did well in this, you should support us for that reason. Secondly, as I've already alluded to in that POI, you are forced to make policy rather than campaign on emotion. Like Mitch McConnell, he doesn't have any policy running against Biden. We force people to actually have policy and actually have something to stand upon because they are involved in the government. You can't just run on the emotion of saying, you all hate this government, you all think this is bad. Thirdly, then we tell you that we get less like massive amount of polarization because you have things like compromise. It means that when you have a blue wave, you can't like lead to a massive amount of policy, and then Republicans can capitalize on that anger and fear and say, you need to vote for us and get rid of like this massive amount of radicalization. We say when you get slow compromising change, you get less polarization, elections are generally more negative. We tell you we get more positive campaigning, and we get campaigning which is more constructive rather than deconstructive, stand with side affirming.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the second negating speaker to further their team's case.
If you can, I'll take PIs in chat, but if not, I'll probably just ask one anyway.
Are we muted?
Yep, no, we're not. Panel, this debate clearly didn't take place in a world where we have non-democratic states. At the point in time where in non-democratic states, there's no fair political system. So the opposition, if there is an opposition in an official sense, doesn't function anyway, as there is no democratic system. So both sides are null. This motion would be implemented in democratic states where we, as the people, wanted to see the change we voted for, where meaningful and fast change occurs uniquely on outside the house. But look, I will deal with the characterizations if you want, and say that the point in time where there's a really corrupt sort of government working in somewhere like Hungary, I think as long as that government is indicative of the population who voted them in there, then I'm happy to take the hard line on that and stand by that, because that is democracy. And then at least some people are getting the change that they want. We win the debate clearly by a landslide. 5 things I'm going to do in today's speech. Firstly, I'm going to ask, are they obstructive? Secondly, I'm going to ask if meaningful changes can actually be pushed through. Thirdly, who better upholds the engagement with democracy? And then finally, talking about finally about which side has parties campaigning better. Okay, what we heard is that these people aren't going to be obstructive because they have this incentive to be seen as being part of a really good government, and so they can get voted in and picked again, right? Look, I think if you're part of a government and you're part of the opposition, you literally just say that you tried and that you just failed, right? You just say that it was you were a token position there and you had absolutely no power, and that therefore you probably want to seem like you were being heralded as some sort of meaningful change. You tried to stop the climate change bill from going through, but you just simply failed, right? There's no incentive to actively campaign for the other team, because at the point in time we're if you really were that good, that you're probably not going to get voted, your side's probably not going to get voted back in, because the whole of democracy and everyone who's voting for you will probably just think that you're probably going to get back in anyway, as they told you, right? They also told you under this sort of point that they are able to retain really good people who are really, really good at their roles, right? Look, I don't think that this was very well proved, because we probably tell you that both sides have people who are really good at Ministry of Defense or whatever it is. That wasn't very exclusive. We've probably still have a very good people there who can actually get meaningful change, right? But what was their pushback in terms of meaningful policies being pushed through? They told you it was just going to come in waves, and you get a blue wave, then you get a red wave, and that was just going to be really harmful because it was backsliding in politics. Look, multiple responses to this. Firstly, if a party is in power, they are indicative of the population, and that was always the most important thing in today's debate, because it means that the people who are getting affected by these policies voted to put them there. And what that means is they are always going to be obligated to fulfill that burden. Because why? Second mechanism, if something is so bad, they will not get voted in again, right? What this means is that if they do, if they didn't fulfill their climate action bill, they just simply won't get another term. But look, I would say secondly, I think secondly, if someone does implement some bad policies, then they come back and they make it so much stronger the second time, because now this the opposition party has a really structured plan on how to fix that, right? Because they've had lots of capital and support, because they've had to go and reach out to so many voters and find out exactly how to fix that, and therefore they make really, really positive changes, and you do completely repair the systems. But look, thirdly, it is so much more beneficial to potentially push through really, really good policy than having absolutely nothing at all, right? Because at least under our side of the house, we potentially have the urgency part of it, in which case we are able to fix climate change. We are able to fight back against that, because look, even if it is so bad and it only lasts 4 years, at least you tried, because that was what was so unique to our side of the house, was that was something that was urgent under our side, and we're able to fulfill that, because look, we simply tell you under the status quo nothing happens, because it is this wash of a grey area where nobody can agree on anything, because everyone is blocking each other's voices out. But look, finally, I'd say even so far as these things only lasted 4 years, at least we got this the benefits within that time. At least we probably well impacted. At least we probably benefited people on the ground who needed to benefit from those things. We probably get things innovative environmental tech within that time, and that was probably always going to be really, really beneficial. Look, at the end of that debate, I think we're really, really happy to stand by people getting policies that support them, and so we think this probably just looks like really normal progressive things in modern day democracies, because that's literally where this debate is set. But even if you wanted to buy it at their best, I think it's still really, really important for the people of Hungary to be able to fulfill their autonomy through their democracies. Yeah, I'll take your PI now, actually.
How is Side Neg going to prevent majorities from gerrymandering and making it harder to vote like we see in the United States right now?
Yeah, perfect. Who better upholds engagement with democracy, right? Let me just deal with your self-serving mechanism first. There are literally higher structures that prevent this from happening, which means that you have particular houses and things that feed back down and literally stop it from happening in the first place, right? But look, I think at the point in time where they were voted in the first place, it was probably because they were at least at some point in time, they were politically palatable, and people wanted them to be there, which means that they probably don't feel the need to even do those things in the first place because they were able to get in the first place. But let's deal with all of these things under this clash as to who better upholds this engagement with democracy. They basically gave you this principle of democracy and that it was like self-serving, right? I would clash that directly with the fact that, like, at the point in time, I would clash that directly with the principle that people don't engage with democracy at the point in time where democracy literally doesn't speak to the things they engage with in the first place, and they probably make no positive ground under that. The other thing we heard, third thing we heard on this was that they will play into the people who put them there. Look, I actually think that's probably a really good thing, right? Because if they were able to get significant amounts of people to vote for them because they cared about them, then that was really good because it means they're like actually giving policy back. Because let's actually engage with the comparative here, right? It's not that you're like now hindering a group in the first place. We tell you that you never actually got any like tangible change in the first place under your side of the house because nothing was actually ever changing, right? But under this point, I would say you also just encourage people to be better in the first place, and I'll like prove more on that later. The last thing we heard on them was that if people feel blocked out from like policy for 4 years straight, that they're just going to stop engaging. Look, they told you this like really weird assertion that people are just going to campaign on anger. Firstly, I would say that's just really not indicative of the rational voter, right? Who literally like cares about the policies that they are being fed because those like directly impact their lives, and that is what the rational voter does. But look, at this point in time where they are doing that irrationally, I think that's probably fine anyway, because at least you're still getting to like fulfill your autonomy through your government who you voted in to be put there in the first place. But look, under outside the house, we gave you so many unresponded mechanisms as to why people now have an incentive to vote where they otherwise didn't, right? Let me just go through those again. Firstly, I would say that it's because you like the policies that you're voting on are now like finally being passed through, which means that you actually see tangible change and you're like, oh, now I'm actually going to go and re-vote the next year because voting actually creates change. Because note, it doesn't do that under their side of the house. Secondly, people are actually seeing the people that they wanted to be voted in sitting and like in positions of power. Thirdly, it's just taking so much longer under their side of the house. Finally, fourthly, on accountability. No, this is still a really exclusive mechanism because now under our side of the house, you're able to like hold people accountable for the change. Right. Why was this really, really important in today's debate though? It's because we tell you under the status quo that like there is a significant amounts of voter suppression. This looks like in areas of like the United States having to drive literally 8 hours to vote. And I think you only are able to like incentivize to actually overcome this under outside the house when you can prove that driving 8 hours will actually make a tangible change because you're not just going to be washed out by the opposition's voices anyway, and literally nothing is going to happen for 4 years straight. That is when you actually go and campaign and you overcome that. Let's deal with this last sort of extension as to like what side has better, which side campaigns better, right? Two things we heard here, three maybe. Firstly, you like you do really, really well as like the police and defense minister, right? I think this probably only helps you like the other side probably get re-elected, right? Because you're proving that you're able to reach some sort of comparison, some sort of compromise, which means like if the people want you specifically, they're actually able to just vote for the other side anyway, just to get you. And under our side of the house, if they want you, then they have to vote for the policies that go along with you. But secondly, they told you stuff about personality politics. Look, this was like an incredible harm under the status quo anyway. We're probably on the side of the like that actually changed that. We flipped that anyway. They finally told you about like less polarization. Look, I think that we proved that like the other side of the house just opposition parties just necessarily are able to campaign better in order to like create meaningful change. At the end of today's debate, I'm incredibly proud to be the only side that actually allows us to full democracy and allow voters to see tangible change for which they voted for. Incredibly proud to stand.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the third affirmative speaker to close out their team substantive.
Okay, perfect.
Maggie.
Am I audible? Good. Okay, all good. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. The point at which the negating team loses this debate so clearly is when they go full hardline. It's when they advocate from second that there'll be no membership of any working group by any party not in a majority. There'll be no involvement, no further engagement. Parties will campaign purely on the hatred of the incumbents. Parties will have no positive issues. It is at this point that they fundamentally lose the debate. 2 points of clash for the House today. First point point of clash on administration, and the second point of clash on a democracy in a principled sense, but also in the engagement into that system. So firstly, on administration, backsliding is prevented on our side of the house. We've said that there's a massive danger in systems where a majority has too much control, in which the opposition is not integrated, in which structures are not put in place that allow other voices to be heard. There is a danger in a majoritarian system like this that one party entrenches its own authority for the long run. Their responses here simply have been weak. They've said these are still democracies, therefore they're not in the debate. India is a democracy. India has free and fair elections. It's just about how the BJP exploits its position of power to hand out resources inside of India. America is still a democracy. It's just one of the things they let their people vote. They let people in the state assemblies vote on is how the congressional boundaries are drawn. That is a problem. That is an easily exploitable niche which allows you to entrench your power. We quite simply prevent this from happening. We put redrawing these regions into the hands of non-partisan people or with opposition input. We have a safety valve, we have a check and a balance to prevent this exploitation. In the Indian example, and in sort of more generally handing things out to your voters, they said that this is a good thing, that they like it when, no. It's fundamental, it must be true in a society that a government serves its people. It cannot only serve its voters. Insofar as it just serves its voters, this is the biggest failure of a democracy. If they only provide cash payments to people in BJP voting areas, they failed in their obligations as a government to help everyone, to be the government of India, not the Hindu people in India, not the people in the states that they control. This is the fundamental obligation of a government, and they fail on this point. We are the side that presents backsliding into authoritarianism, a danger in the largest democratic state on earth, in the largest group of people. We simply win on these grounds alone. Secondly, under this point of clash, on the quality. What they've said is that there's going to be contrarian obstructionism when you involve these people in these choices. Okay, first of all, this is an absurd caricature of how our model works. These people don't necessarily have a veto in every working group. They're not necessarily standing in the room saying, I object to a law, and one person stands up and the law falls down. No, this is when they're involved in the making of the law. This is when they're consulted and they can represent their voters in that law. They can say things like, well, as a party who has an interest in like iwi problems, we think that this resource consents amendment bill, we think that this has implications for this voter group who we care about as this party. We can stand behind this voter group. It enables policy to be made for everyone, not just for the voters that the majority party has, as every party has an interest to serve people who vote for it. And in our system, every party has an interest in making policy that overall serves everybody the best. So there are a few reasons inbuilt in why this kind of policy will inevitably be of a higher quality as well as addressing a broader range of problems. Why will it be of a higher quality? One, simply there are more abilities if you have a broad sweep and if you integrate everybody's skills, everybody's outlook. They've said, well, both parties have skilled people, so this isn't really a problem. Well, is that really true? Like people stay as the head of RBNZ through multiple administrations. People stay in institutional roles because they have experience in them, because maybe they are actually the best person for that role. And we think it's absurd that that best person should be denied that role because they're not of a certain party as they want in their world. If that person is the best person for that role, we believe that that person should remain in that role, and they should be able to run for their party on their record in that role. Stand by an administration that runs on its own record. We don't think that contrarian obstruction. So in a broader sense, why is contrarianism not actually in the interest of people involved? One, as we said from first, insofar as you're involved in the administration, you're accountable for the output of that administration. Therefore, your interest is in improving the output that you can then claim as yours, or say, as Minister for Education, I did X, Y, and Z, not in saying, no, I don't like your education policy. That inherently creates more constructive conversation around policy and inevitably creates higher quality policy at the outset. So what they've said here is that essentially you can just lie and say, well, I objected to this, but they were really mean. So you can still object as your main you can still object in your appeals. This is just absurd. Insofar as you're the Minister for Education in an administration, you can't say, well, they made me do it. No, that's your policy paper. And if you are truly an obstructionist who says no to everything, they will get rid of you and they will appoint somebody, maybe from your party as well. And we support this world in which these people who are truly obstructionists are gotten rid of, and the people who are not are integrated into the system and allowed to administer the best. On to the second point of clash about our democracy. So firstly, in a principled sense, we establish right from first, and I think it still stands here, that a democracy must try and represent as many people as it can. That is its fundamental claim. It does not claim power because of outcomes. It does not claim power because you feel good. It claims power because everybody else's voice is equally as valid as yours, and thus it stands that the most valid system of administration is the one which represents the most possible people. Only our side can ensure this. Their absurd model really doesn't help them here, insofar as if you have 51% of the votes, you control everything, everybody else's voices are ignored. Stand for the 100%, not the 51% on our side of the house. They've also said that they don't mind if there's like overreach, because that's good, because it engages you. No, overreach is a structural problem that infringes future elections and the future rights of people. You cannot say it's good that people in Hungary vote for this party that infringes on the future rights of people to vote, but just because they like that party. They cannot stand behind that. These rights exist in all time. They cannot stand behind one party's actions at one time. Now, finally, on engagement, what we've shown is that when parties are made to campaign behind what they've actually done, rather than behind the hatred of the opposing party, as they say is a good thing, in fact, on their side, because it makes people more angry and thus more motivated, right? What we say is that when people campaign for what they've done, not what they've stopped, or not for what somebody else has done wrong, what we get is people who are accountable to their voters for what they do, not for what the other person does. Every vote in our system is a vote for something, not a vote against something. We think it is inherently much better, even if people aren't as angry, even if that anger isn't there. That anger is not a positive form of engagement. The positive form of engagement is when you want to construct something. Theirs is destructive engagement, even if it is more, which we do not concede. So at the end of these points, what have we shown? One, backsliding is stopped. This wins the debate on its own. Quality is improved. This wins the debate on its own. Our principle of democracy is upheld for all time. This wins the debate on its own. And finally, engagement is improved and is not decreased. This wins the debate. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the third negating speaker to close out their team substantive.
When the affirmative team framed the average voter as not very smart, when the affirmative team framed the average voter of incapable, they essentially lost this debate. Two clashes. Firstly, how does it affect democracy? And secondly, how does it affect like change and legislative efficiency? Okay, how does this affect democracy? Their main sort of push here was like that it lowers the standards, right? It allows governments to backslide into dictatorships like gerrymandering buzzword, allows religious and ethnic superior groups to like maintain their power like the BJP. Firstly, I'd just like to note about like why we don't need to stand by all democracies, right? We think we don't need to stand by like all democracies in this debate, because not all democracies afford significant opposition, like do not afford significant power to the opposition, right? And we think the BJP is literally the perfect example of this, right? Like they literally only give political power to Hindus, right? So we don't think that this debate ever necessarily applies to like this, like these not companies, governments that do this, right? So we think that this, like these sorts of things don't necessarily apply in this debate. So we think that a lot of their analysis sort of like falls short and takes us at a very worst case scenario. But like, even if we do contend with the fact that it's our very worst case scenario, right? We still think that we probably like actually improve these governments like to some extent, because we do get like a greater level of like engagement with them in the first place, right? Okay, so like, with that in mind, like their main push here was that like it allows governments to like backslide into education. Well, firstly, we told you there's like other mechanisms, like free and fair elections every 4 years. It will never be taken away. Like you can't remove, it's very hard to remove democracy in just 4 years. But we also tell you things like there are other mechanisms like the upper house. There are mechanisms like presidents. There's the Governor General in New Zealand that will just like remove you if you try to remove democracy in New Zealand, right? But we also think there's like other mechanisms. Countries like US who have a further mechanism, which is like the Constitution, which like holds their country together, right? Which is like so integral that like they can't like break very easily. And we also think that like people are smart, right? Like there will just be like a lot of backlash against the government if like they start to try and do this, right? Like I don't know, if the Democrats start to like try and be like really undemocratic, like people will just like vote the Republicans in, right? Okay, so like at the end of this, we just generally think that like it's like very unlikely that this will actually ever happen in like these countries with like sophisticated political systems, right? Okay, with that in mind, like how does it affect like the principle and like the capable administration? Well, we think that like actually this doesn't actually change the like capability of the administration that much, right? Like we think this like at a political level, like deciding who's going to be the best chairman of the Environment Select Committee, right, is probably a very political and subjective thing anyway, right? We don't think it's like very clear, but we also think that like most of like the legislation, most of the things like that RMA like repeal is like informed by experts anyway, right? And we finally on the principle, we think this is like not that important. We think it's contingent on the rest of the case. Okay, so like at the end of like their main push here, we see that like actually we they don't like prove any substantial harm. What will our main push here? Our main push was that like more people will vote when they actually see change. We get like better representation, and we also have like more people being able to actually cause change, like getting like their policies through. Okay, their main response here was that like they will see like the opposition is weak and there'll be like an increase in like personality politics. Well, firstly, we think that personality politics, we actually flip that material completely, because instead of people just like when there's like not much change going on and people just having to like vote on like who they like the most, we think that people will actually be like able to push their policies through, and people will be discussing like whether this policy they pushed through was a good thing. So we actually think we get less personality politics. But we also think that like when people are like able to cause change, that like sort of led to the fact that like more people will like voters will like be actually able to see them, right? And finally, we also think like this idea that like seeing the opposition this week, we think that like this is like not necessarily true when the fact that like it becomes more about like policies and it becomes less like people, because like people just like vote for the opposition if like I don't know Labour does something like really crazy, right? But we also think that like we also remove the government to hide behind the opposition as an excuse, right? Like the government can no longer just say that like, oh yeah, the opposition didn't allow us to pass this like really important policy that we really needed to pass, right? We think that like because of that, governments are actually held more accountable. So at the end of this clash, what do we get? We get a government that is far more accountable. We get a government that is like far more focused on policy. And we get a government that is actually like able to do things in a more streamlined process, right? Like what this looks like is that like more policies that like affect a wider range of people. Like if we get like an increased like amount of engagement because people are like voting more because there's like more change, right? What this means is like young people are probably going to like in particular vote more because they think it's actually affecting their lives now, right? So like what this means is they're going to like vote for, I don't know, parties like ACT if they're concerned about like excessive government spending, right? Okay, onto the second clash about change in legislative efficiency. Okay, their main push here was that like it's worth consuming time for debate, and it's like working together to like slow compromising change is better. And like okay, firstly on the first point, we think that like they've sort of like overestimated the role of the executive in like creating this debate, right? We think that like the most way that this debate is formed is like by the opposition talking to the media. We think that like most of the speeches that people give in the House are very like predictable. They're very like, it's just like the opposition normally just like wasting time to like delay, right? We think that it's like more effective when these parties like these opposition actually like talk to like people on the streets and talk to media, because like the people are like smart, right? Okay. We also think that like most of the stuff we like are removing is like select committees, so like there's still like avenues for this debate. But so like in regards to the second thing about like people working together to form slow compromising change, well, at like a very base level, we think that slow compromising change is not enough in many significant cases, right? Like we think that there are some issues like high levels of government debt in like the US that like simply cannot be changed by just like slow compromising change. You just literally, if that was your biggest issue, you would just need to elect like a Republican government, right? So we think that like, and that would just like have to be done like really quickly. But by the same token, we also think that like if you were like really concerned about climate change, like that wouldn't be able to be done unless you had like a lot of like legislation passed really quickly. And we also think that like the idea that they represent everyone is just never true. They're never going to represent everyone, because that's not just what happens. And in fact, we actually think that we represent more people, because we get like more people engaged through like our previous mechanisms, because like more people are able to see change and they're voting more. So we actually think that we like flip this idea about representation and stuff. And we think that like we still get like the majority, like when you vote, when National gets into government with like, I don't know, when they get into government with like most of the seats, that means that like most of the people support them, most of the people support their policies, and most of the people want to see their policies actually get through, right? Okay, so like they're going to be like really disheartened when like their policies aren't able to get through because like Labour's blocking them all, for example. So what that means is that like people will also just like lose faith in the system, right? And it's like finally on like urgency, we think that like their main push here was that like, oh, if it's like really important, then like people will just like vote it through anyway, right? Well, we think that like this only applies in like very few apolitical situations. We think that like this is like necessarily observably false when it comes to issues like government debt, where like you know, you just see like Joe Biden like just printing off more and more money, right? And we also think that there are like still like the least like significantly political issues like conversion therapy or something like still could have passed earlier with like less without less opposition if like this happened. So we still think that this could have caused like significant change. At the end of this, we think that we like solve some of those biggest issues and some of these like time-bound issues that like can't necessarily be like unchanged or like repealed by the next government, right? Like you can't like unfix climate change or something. And like we also get this like more engagement. So like we win this debate. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much for that speech. Now as traditional in schools debating, we reverse the speaking order, so I invite up the negating leader's reply.
Colonel, the harms of climate change are so expansive. You see kids literally going to have to go to school in cities wearing masks because of the air pollution. We are having people like losing their homes and their animals due to like immense amounts of bushfires. When you see people losing their homes due to like rising sea levels, that if we're the only side of the house that even stands a chance of alleviating that, then we actually probably win. I think that we prove so extensively down our line that actually happens. But look, they're comparatives. They don't even get any opportunity to change. And I think that was always going to be what lost them the debate debate, because even if it's only like a really small chance that something could happen on our side, that was always going to be debate winning just because of how extreme that was. Two questions to ask yourself at the end of today's debate. Firstly, what are the value of meaningful policies? And secondly, who better enfranchises voters? Okay, what are the values of meaningful policies? The pushback from this was essentially that people wouldn't be obstructive. But look, we told you clearly that like if you would want to be obstructive, because literally the things the party is trying to pass literally does not align with your core belief systems and your political beliefs. But secondly, even if you individually want to be like a pick-me, your party is still telling you to be obstructive, right? What does this mean? It means that we're exclusively able to push through really, really meaningful policies, such as things like climate change, such as the things that they literally didn't respond to. The impacts of that are so extensive that it actually changes the lives of every single person. So look, even if you didn't vote for the policy on climate change, you're still going to get benefits from that. The benefits to that is so expansive that we literally win the debate every single time. Why? Because I would say that it would probably these sort of things probably did work, even if the next party did want to get even if they weren't voted in the second time, the next party probably wasn't going to get rid of it anyway, because it's probably more legwork to get rid of it than it is just to keep it. But look, even if it is only for 4 years, that's still 4 years that are so many longer than 0. And at least we tried under our side of the house and we're able to say that, whereas on their side of the house, they are not, because there was no change even in the question. The pushback from them was literally about bad policies. Look, I'm really not sure what principal point they're trying to run, where Auckland Blue knows what's better for the average voter in a particular country than the average voter themselves, who gets to now opt into democracy because they're now able to make votes on things that actually impact them. But secondly, I think this can always get changed, right? Look, I think thirdly, we're willing to take the risks at the point in time, and I think we're actually really proud to take a hard line here and say that no change is still better. Bad change is better than no change, because you can always overcorrect bad change, but you can't correct or fix a slow burn of incredible harms, because nothing ever changes under their side of the house. That was incredibly harmful. Right, now who better enfranchises voters? On our side of the house, we tell you so exclusively that people are actually able to see tangible change getting made. Because look, even if it's not your party that's actually making this tangible change, you're now actually able to see that there is a political system, a democracy that actually does make change, and you're wanting to engage with that, right? Because even if it's not you, you're actually able to now let's note here that the status quo that they are literally supporting is where most people are probably leaning towards apoliticism, or they're literally just voting for the party that's probably less bad. People are actually able to get really engaged with politics under our side of the house because they're seeing that tangible change and they want to engage with that. Why? Because of the mechanisms that we gave you in terms of accountability, in terms of actually seeing your people sitting in power, making decisions, and in terms of actually seeing that change being made. Look, let's just talk about the impacts of these two things. Firstly, I say that we actually get more people voting, and that was always going to be a benefit to our side of the house. At the point in time, we probably overcome most of the harms, but they wanted to say the policies didn't reflect the people, right? You actually have democracy under our side of the house, and that was debate winning at the point in time where the people are actually getting change in their everyday life, and they're actually getting policies that are catered towards people and make that meaningful change. That was always debate winning, because we're actually the side that stands for democracy, incredibly proud to do so, right? But you also get meaningful policies actually pushed through in the first place. These could actually change people's lives, right? They are refusing to do anything. They are seeing the crises and the problems, and they are just willing to stand by absolutely no change because you want to be palatable to both sides of the house. Incredibly, incredibly proud to be the only side that stands for democracy, proud to stand.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the final speech of the debate, affirmative leaders reply.
Side negating cannot be the side of democracy when they stand for gerrymandering, when they stand for a majority of 51% to decide what is best for the 100%. They cannot be the side of democracy when they tell us that bad change is better than no change. Stand with side affirming the side that wants quality government. What am I going to do here today? I'm going to walk you through why side negating can't win on their burden of how policy is going to be worse on our side, then walk you through why we extend our margin of victory by improving the quality of democracy. Let's talk about then why side negating can't actually win. We told you first, side negating's main push was that policy isn't going to get passed. They firstly told us that you will just sort of strike against your opposition party. We tell you that you have no incentive to do nothing when you are elected or when you're put in that position of power because of the reasons we gave you down the line about how you want to set a good example for yourself when you go to voting. The response we only heard from them was in third, when they told us that they can just hide behind their government and say their government prevented them from doing anything, which is a completely ridiculous claim. But even if you believe, but their claim also doesn't stand when you use their logic against them, because they tell us that voters are smart, intelligent, and rational thinkers. Surely as rational thinkers, they would understand that this person is lying and has actually just done nothing rather than actually getting blocked. They lose on their own analysis. We also brought you material down the line about how you're still likely to get policy. You just get things like concessions. You maybe not have a massive amount of spending on climate change, but you still get that because you you value all the other different perspectives as a whole. We still get policy. The next push that they brought us was the idea of speed. We told you that speed does not really matter when you get extreme policy, which is like very far left, and then they swing in on the right and they try and push it all the way back. Their only response was that you can't unfix climate change. Sure, you can't unfix the giant like climate system of the earth, but you can do what Ronald Reagan did and get rid of all the solar panels off the White House when Jimmy Carter left. You can change policy. It happens all the time. We saw it with Obamacare. We saw it with like infrastructure bills in the United States. We see it all the time. Finally, then we brought you material about how this policy is likely to be of higher quality. We told you, one, because you get more skills and experience, because instead of rolling someone every election cycle, you can keep someone in, they understand that role well, and they learn it well, like we saw in Defense Secretary with Obama. They understand that position well, rather than what you get on the gaining side, where you just roll that person and get in a new person. We get better quality policy along with new perspectives. How do we improve quality of democracy then? And this is where side negating really shot themselves in the foot in this debate. Because when we tell you that backsliding is a major problem, their only responses to backsliding was one, oh, well, if backsliding has happened, surely that the people consented to it because they voted to it. Sure, they consented to the party at the time, but they didn't consent to that party being in power for the rest of history of that country. And then secondly, they told us that gerrymandering is good because it motivates you to go out and vote. Like, surely it's a bad thing if you have to drive 8 hours to get to a voting box, especially when that voting box is gerrymandered with like a humongous rural area in that city, which means that your vote doesn't actually matter anyway. Democracy is harmed on their side. We brought you material about more representation, why that's principally valuable. That material wasn't really responded to. It still stands. Then we brought you about more engagement because you actually see people in your government doing things. The only response to this is that they said that we want angry engagement. We want people to be angry. We tell you that being angry is bad because you don't actually get policy. It means that people campaign on the bad things, and we can campaign on personality, campaigning on like feelings, rather than campaigning on policy and what you did good in your job. Because we have more positive campaigning, because we have a higher quality of democracy that actually exists rather than the gerrymandered world that side negating wants to stand for, and because we prove to you that policy is still going to be passed, it's more representative and still exists, we win on side affirming. Well debated, Otago. It's fun debate.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Well done.